The Shanghai Cooperation Organization made waves in China's coastal city of Qingdao. What key agreements have been reached this year? And as the world watches the Trump-Kim summit, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will meet with Chinese officials in Beijing on Thursday. What's China's role in the lead-up to the summit and after? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. What a joy to have friends coming from afar. Leaders and officials from 8 member states, 4 observer states and 6 dialogue partners of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as heads of international and regional organizations, gathered in China's coastal city of Qingdao last weekend for the annual SCO summit, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Several documents, including a Qingdao declaration, were approved with the ultimate goal of building a new and promising path to a community with a shared future. Looking back, how have the SCO's broad achievements been realized over the past 17 years? And what can we expect for the years ahead? Joining me from Moscow is Anna Kireva, Associate Professor in the Department of Asian and African Studies and Research Fellow at the Center for Comprehensive Chinese Studies and Regional Projects at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. And in Beijing, we're joined by Professor Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome to both of you. Now, China hosted the SCO summit for the first time in 6 years. The last time China hosted was in Beijing in 2012. This year also marked the first summit since India and Pakistan became full members of the organization. So, Professor Cui, how do we evaluate the results and the significance of this year's summit?
Yes, as we know, this time, for this Qingdao summit, it would be, very historic, sense, and it will become a milestone for this organization. And even at this moment, the SCO, especially after its first enlargement, now it becomes, the biggest comprehensive regional organization in the world. And then now it takes more than 40% of the whole population in the world. And certainly, I think that not only for this scale and the size, at this moment, I think that the Qingdao summit also given, a signal or message for the new stage for this organization. For example, besides on the original security cooperation, this time, I think the economic and the financial and the people-to-people cultural exchange cooperation will be, very, very potential fields for the future for SCO.
Okay. Well, despite internal diversity and differences among member states, the SCO didn't end up going nowhere, as some analysts predicted 17 years ago when the SCO was founded. Instead, the organization has flourished and grown in stature. So, Anna, are you surprised with the achievements of the organization? Why was it able to get where it is today?
We can see that there has been a huge progress in international development, institutional development of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the basic idea is that the principles of the Shanghai Five that were put into the foundation of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization are the principles that have been endorsed by all the states. That's why they have been agreed upon from the very beginning. And we have seen a rather substantial progress in security sphere especially, and some progress in economic sphere of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I guess that the major principles of mutual respect, respect for mutual sovereignty, of non-interference into domestic affairs, then mutual co-development. These have been the core principles of the organization from the very beginning. And a lot of trust-building measures have really contributed to better relations in this regional organization. And now we have seen completely another scope in geography, also in spheres of cooperation. And we can see that it has seen really a profound development. But we also can see that with the accession of India and Pakistan, there is a huge shift in power balance and huge shift in strategies of member states of Shanghai Cooperation Organization from a regional organization based on cooperation in Central Asia. It has really become a huger, a broader organization in terms of geography and its scope.
Right. Well, that puts into challenge what kind of relationship member countries want to forge within or under the SCO framework. Chinese President Xi Jinping mentioned the building of international relations based on a new type of international relationship. Let's listen to what he said during the summit on Sunday.
The Shanghai spirit is our shared asset, and the SCO is our shared home. We should, guided by the Shanghai spirit, work closely to build an SCO community with a shared future, move toward a new type of international relations, and build an open, inclusive, clean and beautiful world that enjoys lasting peace, universal security, and common prosperity.
Well, Anna, let me come to you again. Why is this type of international relations important or relevant in China's eyes, and what sets it apart from what we have already today in the Western-dominated order?
So we can see that Shanghai Cooperation Organization has demonstrated a lot of continuity in a kind of a common voice or a common stance on major regional, well, so-called three evils, combating terrorism, extremism, and separatism. And here, I guess, the positions of all the member states of the regional Shanghai Five, they coincide to a greater degree. I think that in this regard, all the states have always expressed their unequivocal support for common development, for combating terrorism, and the regional anti-terror structure which has been established under the SCO has really shown that it is a very important regional mechanism. And of course, these kind of relationships which are based on mutual respect for each other, on the principles of equality, on the principles of consensus, they're really very important as a kind of new relations for regional and even broader international architecture of cooperation between the states.
Right. In the Qingdao Declaration, member states expressed unanimous support, let's say, for the mediation of conflicts in Afghanistan, Syria, the Middle East, and the Korean Peninsula. So, Professor Cui, is this the first time for SCO member states to reach this kind of consensus on hot topics?
Yes, I think that this time, I think for Qingdao summit, not only SCO will continue its function to help the regional security and peace, and also now I think that just like Mr. Xi mentioned that it's now the good time for SCO to expand its concern out of the region. For example, the SCO will try to have some more contribution to global governance, including the security governance. And also, as we know, all of these issues, it's related to SCO, to the member states. For example, how about the Iranian nuclear issue? As we know, Iran now is already the observer to SCO, and also some other, for example, the Korean Peninsula issue. It's also related deeply with some member states of SCO. So I think that it will be a showcase of how could China and other member states of SCO to try to improve not only the visibility of SCO and also the credibility of SCO to help the international security settlement.
However, as the SCO expands its role, Professor Cui, do you see this organization going on some kind of a collision course with you know, for instance, the United States in terms of the Iran nuclear issue, or NATO in some other ways, as many people have feared?
I think firstly, regarding to the relations between SCO and some other, security arrangement or security organization, I think firstly there will not be a confrontation between them, because as we know, for SCO it insists a kind of a new concept of security, including the comprehensive and cooperative and sustainable security. So I think another thing we can find out also from this Qingdao summit, SCO expressed its willing to get a more cooperative relations with other regional or security organization. I think including maybe in future we can find a way for SCO to have some more relations, to have some more exchange with other security organizations. So I don't think there will be any real potential or risk for this confrontation.
Okay, let me come to the relationship between China and Russia. And to Anna, Russian President Vladimir Putin was ordered the Friendship Award, which is the highest honor China has ever given to any foreigner. What do you think is bringing China and Russia closer and closer?
Thank you very much for this question. Actually, I think this is a very important symbol, and this has been the first destination of Vladimir Putin's state visit, that is China, after he became inaugurated for his fourth term as a president. So I guess it also strengthens the political and security relations between the two states, and we can clearly see that the two leaders have a very good personal rapport, and that last year President Xi was also awarded a decoration from the Russian government as well. So I guess this is kind of a mutual understanding that these two countries, Russia and China, are very close strategic partners, and that their cooperation should be enhanced in future as well. And we have already seen a high level of political and security coordination, and I guess this visit was also very important as it showed new fields in economic sphere that Russia and China are developing, and then they need to develop in future.
Okay, let me come very briefly to Professor Cui on the question of the Belt and Road Initiative and the SCO. The Belt and Road Initiative was a very important part of the Qingdao Declaration, but not every member is on board to that idea, namely India. So what is the relation? What is going to be the future relationship between this initiative and this organization? Very briefly, please.
Yes, I think there will have a very natural, connectivity between SCO and the Belt and Road Initiative. This time, Qingdao summit will give a, very good platform for this synergies between SCO and BRI. And in future, even now, not every member states will agree with these synergies between SCO and BRI. But I think in future, especially some more fruitful cooperation will give some more proof to this space for this cooperation between SCO and BRI in future.
Thank you very much to my two guests, Anna Kiriva, Associate Professor in the Department of Asian and African Studies and Research Fellow at the Center for Comprehensive Chinese Studies and Regional Projects at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, and to Professor Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. We'll take a very short break, and you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin, and when we come back, I'll be asking, what's China's role after the highly anticipated Trump-Kim summit in Singapore? Stay with me. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will meet with senior officials in Beijing on Thursday to discuss the outcome of the highly anticipated summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Months in the making, the summit is scheduled to take place on Tuesday after a flurry of diplomacy punctuated by theatrical twists and turns. Given Kim Jong-un has come to China to meet with President Xi Jinping twice in the past few months, and the two countries share a special historical relationship, what has been China's unique role in the lead-up to the summit, and what will be China's role after the summit? And does the U.S. administration, or at least the Secretary of State, recognize that role, or does it matter? On the eve of the summit, I'm joined in the Beijing studio by Xu Qingdao, Senior Fellow at the Pango Institution, and from Boston by Robert Ross, Professor of Political Science at Boston College. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Let's talk about an interesting detail that everybody has noticed, I guess, by now. That is the plane that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un took while going to attend that summit in Singapore. It was not a DPRK Air Force On, as it is known, but an Air China Boeing 747. There you go, that's the plane. And he emerged out of the cabin and there you see Air China written there and the Chinese national flag. So I want to ask this question to Professor Ross, maybe. Professor Ross in Boston, how significant is this detail there? And do you think this says something about the relationship or the role China plays in this whole thing?
I think it says two things. One, I think it says something about the superiority of American technology, that both North Korean and Chinese leaders fly in an American jet. But then second, it also shows Chinese support. Yes, it's true. Yes. And second, it also shows that North Korea and China are cooperating in this effort, and North Korea has full Chinese support.
Yeah. Well, Qingdao here in the studio, I mean, we are not even just seeing him flying a Chinese jet or an American-made Chinese jet, but he actually flew over, for the great majority of the trajectory, over China's airspace. Why is all of that?
Well, I think I might add, maybe at least one point. That is like the Chinese, air service. Obviously, this represents, or it reveals, this political trust between the two countries. It's not, from South Korea, not from Japan, not from the U.S. It's from China. And also, flying to Singapore, of course, involves a security issue. Obviously, there's a trust in the Chinese service here.
Okay, let's talk about what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said about China's role. In a recent interview, he stressed the importance of China's role in improving relations in the U.S.'s efforts to improve relations with the DPRK and in facilitating the summit. Let's take a listen.
Oh, I'm very confident that China will play a role. Indeed, they have already to date. They've been important partners in the pressure campaign. They've done things that they've never agreed to do before, to encourage Chairman Kim and the North Koreans to consider whether they're prepared to make the flip.
So, Professor Ross, as an expert in Chinese security policy and defense policy, how would you describe the concrete contents of China's role in the whole puzzle through the eyes of Pompeo?
Well, I think there are two halves to this puzzle. One is the process getting to Singapore. And of course, China's played an important role, meeting with the North Korean leadership on multiple occasions. But I think we also need to understand that over the last 20 to 25 years, despite Chinese pressure, North Korea continued with its nuclear program. So much of the success we see today getting to Singapore doesn't really reflect Chinese sanctions, Chinese pressure, but I believe North Korean confidence that they are now a nuclear power. They have missiles, they have warheads, and now they're prepared to sit down and talk. This is a process reflecting North Korean success rather than Chinese pressure. But then second, going forward, China will play a critical role, because both the United States and China, United States, China, and North Korea, will want the Chinese in there as something of an honest broker. The Chinese are going to want any agreement to work, any roadmap to be continued. They're going to want both sides to play according to the rules they agree on. So the United States will look to China to keep North Korea honest, but North Korea will look to China to support it should the Americans fail to follow the rules of the road.
Qingdao, do you think Pompeo's expectation for China's role aligned with China's own vision? And what do you think of what Professor Ross just said just now?
Well, I tend to agree with Professor Ross that China is playing a significant role. For example, the meetings with President Xi Jinping, with Chairman Ken, obviously I think that boosts his confidence to go ahead and meet President Trump in Singapore. That's very important. And of course, China, I would say, will play or is playing a very important role in terms of its economic development. For example, 90% of its trade with China, if the country is indeed opening to the outside world, China will play an even more important role in that aspect.
But doesn't the DPRK, Qingdao, always want to have a better relationship with the United States, and so that it can start developing its economy? Who's in the more important driver's seats here, Qingdao?
Well, its consideration in terms of relationship with the United States is mostly a security issue. Obviously, there is a fear in North Korea that the U.S. will engineer a regime change, by military or through other means. So this is a concern because the two countries are literally at war. So they have to end this warring relationship and start a new chapter. That is, to establish a full, say, diplomatic relationship and to normalize their relationship. And then that's the environment for the development of this country.
Also, very briefly, to help us understand the Chinese position here, Qingdao, I'm going to stick with you for this one. How does China want things to play out in Singapore? Is China happy to be in the back and not invited in the talk and watching from a distance?
Let me say, I think China is more than happy to see if there's any deal, if the summit is successful, and China will give its full support to this deal, because ultimately China enjoys the common goal as the United States and North Korea, South Korea, and Japan. That is, Korean Peninsula is free from nuclear weapons, and peace and stability will be there.
Okay, let's talk a little bit of some kind of a worst-case scenario. If nothing comes out of the summit in Singapore, Professor Ross, what can China do? Can China help do something there?
Well, that is indeed the worst case, and I think by this point it's highly unlikely. The last thing President Trump needs is another failed summit after his recent meetings in Canada. But should this break down without an agreement, should there be a lack of understanding on how to go forward, I would imagine the American side, the American president, would resort to his prior attempts at coercive diplomacy. As in the past, that will escalate tension, create instability in the Northeast Asia, but ultimately that will fail just as it's failed in the past. There's really no alternative for the United States but to negotiate and to find some way to go forward with the North Korean leadership in a step-by-step process of improving relations. So a failed summit's unlikely, but it would unfortunately bring the relationship back to where it started at the beginning of the Trump administration.
Well, some people have also suggested the idea that China could be some kind of a guarantor of security for the DPRK, but maybe together with Russia, if not just in the progress of denuclearization, but also to ensure security of the country. Professor Ross, how likely do you think that is going to happen?
Well, I think there's no doubt that China has a vital interest in the stability of its neighbor North Korea and would resist any effort by any country to destabilize North Korea and to try and create trouble on Chinese borders. So in this respect, both the North Korean leadership and the Chinese leadership have a common interest in stability, resisting regime change, so on and so forth. And just to add to that, we need to understand that any American idea that it might be able to weaken the Chinese-North Korean relationship is something of an illusion. North Korea borders the largest army in the world, one of the most modern armies in the world, and the idea that it would challenge Chinese security by moving out from under China and establish better security relations with the United States, that's just not going to happen. So the long-term relationship between China and North Korea is a stable one, it's a secure one, with a common interest in maintaining stability in North Korea.
Yeah. Qingdao, to that idea of China being a guarantor of security for the DPRK, is this something China would consider?
Well, China never publicly or officially talked about that idea, but I don't think that is a problem for China or Russia. The problem is really for North Korea. I don't think North Korea is ready to accept that. For them, the security concern is really about the United States. So negotiation or other means, they want to solve that problem with North Korea, with South Korea, not with China or Russia.
Another interesting point some people have been talking about is this possible peace agreement to officially end the Korean War. Now, President Trump suggested that a formal agreement to end the war could come out of the summit, but there are sharp differences over whether or not China needs to be there for such an agreement to be legally bound, as China was a signatory to the Armistice Treaty signed in July 1953. Professor Ross, what's your take?
I would think that any peace agreement on the Korean Peninsula would be a multi-party agreement. It would include the Chinese, the Americans, North Korea, South Korea. They would all be part of a peace agreement. And going forward again, when Secretary Pompeo comes to Beijing, these are kind of the issues that he's going to want to discuss. That is, the likelihood is that Kim and Trump will agree to a step-by-step process, and to make this process work, China will play the role of an honest broker and a participant in the process. And so the discussion of a peace treaty, once again, Pompeo comes, they will talk about Chinese participation in that process.
Again, Qingdao, what is the position of the Chinese government on this? Has there been any indication of whether or not the Chinese government would accept? I mean, the veterans, the survivors of the war, they want that their representative is at the table, right, when the war is officially ended, because hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers died for that war.
Yes, I agree. I think at least some people will not be happy if China is absent for this warring states to end officially. And I agree with Professor Ross. I don't think that will happen. I think, you know, in order to ensure any agreement, any deal to be implemented smoothly, need Chinese participation, close participation. So I don't think anybody would be stupid, be that stupid to exclude the China side.
Okay, I think that discussion, what is China's role, whether China has a role here, can be laid to rest. I hope we don't talk about it ever again. Many thanks to my two guests, Xu Qingdao, Senior Fellow at the Pango Institution, and Professor Robert Ross at the Boston College. And here is my point. I think the most interesting picture, once again, so far, is the one with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un emerging from the Chinese airplane with the Chinese national flag shining in the background. I believe it is both security and safety considerations that drove his decision to fly in the Chinese plane instead of his own country's jet. Someone that you can entrust your life, that is the level of trust between the DPRK and China. Because of such a bond, China will inevitably be an indispensable player in the process to achieve peace on the peninsula. Whether or not other people recognize that role is of little importance, and China does not need to assert itself here to win any peace prize. Having seen the ups and downs of the past 20 years, China knows full well what lies behind any optics. So, Team Trump, show your white teeth, but roll up your sleeves for some tough work ahead. That's all from me for this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. The handle is The Point with LX. Thank you for watching. You've got the point.